Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling a really weighty topic, the potential impact of a ceasefire on Israel.
It's a complex one for sure.
It is. And to help us unpack it all, we've got a whole stack of sources. Everything from those Wikipedia entries on the 47 to 48 Civil War
Oh, yeah.
and the Palestinian expulsion and flight to articles on the Balfour Declaration and even the Oslo Accords.
And what's interesting is that the whole concept of a Jewish state, that idea, has been debated since like the early 1900s. It's kind of a recurring theme in a lot of these sources, highlights just how many different perspectives and arguments there are, shaping the whole conflict.
So before we can even start to think about a ceasefire, we really need to understand the background, right? Like what led us to where we are now? What are the big historical moments?
Well, you can't talk about this conflict without going back to the British Mandate period. I mean, that's when things really started to heat up. You had increased Jewish immigration to Palestine,
Right.
fueled in part by the Balfour Declaration. The one that promised a national home for the Jewish people.
The Balfour Declaration. I feel like I've heard of that, but remind me.
Okay, so it's this document from 1917 where the British government basically said they supported establishing a Jewish national home in Palestine.
Okay.
Problem is, the language was super vague. It didn't actually say what a national home meant or how it would affect the Arab population that was already living there.
So like built-in tension from the very beginning.
Yeah, exactly. And those problems really came to a head in 1947 with the UN partition plan. The idea was to divide Palestine into two states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem under international control.
And how'd that go?
Not well. Neither side was really happy with the proposed border.
Right.
And things escalated super quickly into a full-blown civil war in 1948.
Oh, wow.
So the Jewish community in Palestine, the Yishuv, they mobilized their defense forces. Groups like the Haganah, which later became the Israel Defense Forces.
And on the Palestinian side?
Palestinian Arabs mobilized too. They had support from the Arab Liberation Army.
Okay.
And even some foreign fighters joined the conflict, like some World War II veterans from Germany and Bosnia.
Really?
Yeah, it was a really chaotic time. Lots of violence.
I can imagine.
By March 1948, there were already an estimated 2,000 dead and 4,000 wounded. And during this time, you had mass displacement of Palestinians,
Okay.
which is often referred to as the 1948 Palestinian expulsion and flight.
That sounds like a pretty sensitive topic.
It is. There are a lot of different narratives about what happened, but hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were either forced from their homes or fled during the conflict, and that displacement has had a lasting impact, on the region.
So we've got this backdrop of rising tensions and broken promises and this devastating war that ultimately led to the creation of Israel and the displacement of a large part of the Palestinian population.
Right, and that displacement together with the unresolved issues of Jerusalem's status, and the right of return for Palestinian refugees, and the existence of Israeli settlements in the West Bank are what make this whole idea of a ceasefire so complex.
Okay, so let's talk ceasefire. If one were to be implemented today, what would that actually look like for Israel? What would it mean?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's not easy to answer. A ceasefire could have a ripple effect on everything from security to economics to domestic politics, even Israel's relationships with its allies.
So let's start with security. I mean, that's got to be top of mind, right? Would a ceasefire make Israel safer? Or could it actually make things worse?
That's the big dilemma, and there are strong arguments on both sides. Some people argue that a ceasefire could actually decrease violence by taking away some of the motivation for groups like Hamas to attack. The logic there is that if there's progress towards a peaceful resolution, there's less incentive to resort to violence.
Makes sense, but I can also see the other side of it.
Oh, yeah. The worry is that a ceasefire could be seen as a sign of weakness, that it could embolden those groups and actually lead to more attacks. It's a tough call for Israel's security forces, trying to balance a desire for peace with the need to protect their citizens.
Definitely high stakes.
Yeah.
And speaking of high stakes, what about the settlements? I mean, they're a huge point of contention. What happens to them if there's a ceasefire?
The settlements. That's one of those issues that really gets to the heart of the conflict.
Yeah.
Even within Israel, there's a lot of debate about them. Some people see them as an obstacle to peace and advocate for a two-state solution where the settlements would have to be dismantled or at least scaled back significantly. Others see them as a fundamental part of Israel, essential for security, or even based on historical and religious claims to the land.
So a ceasefire could force Israel to make some really tough choices about the settlements.
Absolutely. And whatever they decide, it's going to have a major impact on both Israelis and Palestinians. But, before we get too deep into the whole two-state solution thing, we should probably talk about another really sensitive topic: Jerusalem.
Ah, yes. Jerusalem, the city that both Israelis and Palestinians claim as their capital. Talk about a powder keg. How could a ceasefire even begin to touch such a sensitive issue?
Yeah, Jerusalem is like the Gordian knot of this conflict. It's so intertwined with history and religion and national identity on both sides. Any ceasefire agreement would have to address Jerusalem's status, and finding a solution that works for both Israelis and Palestinians is a huge challenge.
I can see how that would be a major sticking point. Okay, so we've got security concerns, the settlements, and the incredibly complex issue of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
But there's more to it than just the political and territorial side of things, right? A ceasefire would also have a real economic impact on Israel.
Oh, absolutely. Economics are always a factor. On the one hand, a ceasefire could be great for the Israeli economy. Reduced security threats could lead to increased investment, more tourism. It could open up new opportunities for trade and cooperation with neighboring countries.
Right, peace, dividend, and all that. But there's got to be a downside, too, right?
Of course. The immediate aftermath of a ceasefire could actually bring a lot of uncertainty. Investors might hesitate until things settle down. And there's always the possibility of boycotts from countries that don't agree with Israel's policies. It's complicated. There are potential benefits and risks to consider.
So we've got this whole multi-layered situation with external factors like security and economic shifts. But it's not just about the outside world, is it?
Mm-hmm.
A ceasefire would also play out against the backdrop of Israel's internal politics.
Exactly. We can't really understand the potential impact of a ceasefire without looking at the domestic political landscape in Israel. Speaking of which, I came across a news snippet from February of this year, 2024, that's pretty relevant to all of this. It mentioned Israel's rejection of internationally imposed solutions to the conflict.
Oh, interesting. What's the takeaway there?
Well, it shows that Israel has historically been wary of solutions dictated by outside powers. They much preferred direct negotiations with the Palestinians, which, is understandable given all the historical context we've been talking about. Right. But here's the thing. Internally, is there even a unified stance within Israel on how to approach a ceasefire and potentially a two-state solution?
Good question. Is Israeli society on the same page about this?
Not even close. Israeli society is super divided on this issue. You have those who are all for a two-state solution, seeing it as the only way to achieve lasting peace. Then you have others who believe Israel should hold on to the occupied territories, for security reasons, historical claims to the land, or even religious beliefs.
So this internal tug-of-war is happening within Israel. But it's not just about internal divisions, right? We've also got to factor in the influence of international actors' allies. Some of our sources suggested that there's growing pressure internationally for a Palestinian state, even without a negotiated agreement between Israel and Palestine.
And that's a key point. The international community, those big players like the U.S., the UN, the EU, and various Arab states, they can exert a lot of influence on the situation. They can apply diplomatic pressure, offer economic incentives, even threaten sanctions to try and push Israel in a certain direction.
And it sounds like the idea of a Palestinian state being recognized internationally, even without a negotiated agreement, is gaining some traction. How would that affect Israel's stance on a ceasefire?
That's a scenario that Israel is definitely aware of. If enough countries recognize a Palestinian state, it could put a lot of pressure on Israel to accept a two-state reality. It might make a ceasefire seem like a more appealing option. But we also have to remember that Israel has strong allies, particularly the United States, which could shield it from some of that international pressure.
Okay, so we've looked at the potential impact of a ceasefire from Israel's perspective. We've talked about security settlements, internal politics, and international pressure. But we've really only heard one side of the story, haven't we? What about the Palestinians?
You're right. We can't fully understand this issue without considering the Palestinian perspective. Any kind of lasting peace has to take into account their needs and concerns.
So let's shift gears and look at things from their point of view. What are Palestinians looking for in all of this? And how might a ceasefire affect their lives?
For Palestinians, a ceasefire isn't just about stopping the violence. It's about hope for a better future. Their core demands include an end to the Israeli occupation, the establishment of a viable, independent Palestinian state, and for some, the right of return for refugees displaced in 1948.
So a ceasefire, especially if it leads to real peace talks, could be a step towards achieving those goals. But even within the Palestinian community, are there different opinions on how to get there?
Definitely. There are some big divisions within Palestinian leadership, mainly between Fatah, which controls the West Bank, and Hamas, which governs Gaza. Those divisions make things complicated. It's like trying to solve one of those multi-dimensional puzzles. You've got all these different pieces, security settlements, Jerusalem, internal politics on both sides, the role of international actors, and they're all interconnected.
We've definitely uncovered a lot of layers here, so let's take a moment to digest all of this. We'll be back in a bit to continue our deep dive and explore what a potential path towards peace might actually look like, taking everything we've discussed into account.
Picking up where we left off, let's think a bit more about the Palestinian perspective on a potential ceasefire. What would it mean for their everyday lives, their economy, the whole political scene?
It's easy to get caught up in the big picture stuff, but this is really about people's lives on the ground, isn't it?
Exactly. For Palestinians living under occupation, life is tough. Restrictions on movement checkpoints, economic struggles, the constant threat of violence. It's a heavy load to carry. A ceasefire, if it's done right, could provide some relief from all that.
So a ceasefire could bring back some sense of normalcy? What about economically? Could a ceasefire help boost the Palestinian economy?
Potentially, yeah. If those restrictions on movement and trade were eased, Palestinian businesses could thrive. Trade with neighboring countries could increase. More jobs, a better quality of life for a lot of people.
That sounds promising, but I imagine there's a lot of skepticism too, right? On the Palestinian side, I mean, after so many broken promises, failed peace efforts, it's understandable.
You're absolutely right. Palestinians have seen so many ceasefires come and go, only to be followed by more violence. There's a deep mistrust of Israeli intentions. Many fear that a ceasefire is just a way for Israel to tighten its control over the occupied territories. They've been let down before.
So it's not just about the words in an agreement. It's about what happens afterwards. What would it take to make a ceasefire work this time? What could build trust between both sides?
That's the key question, isn't it? A ceasefire can't just be hitting the pause button on the conflict. It has to come with concrete steps to address the root causes. Things like easing those restrictions on movement, releasing Palestinian prisoners, freezing settlement expansion. Those are actions that could show a genuine commitment to peace and start rebuilding trust.
Sounds like a delicate dance. Both sides have to compromise, show they're acting in good faith.
For sure. And this is where the international community comes in. They can play a crucial role as mediators, helping to guarantee the terms of a ceasefire and supporting efforts to rebuild trust and promote economic development. But in the end, it's up to Israelis and Palestinians to find a way to coexist peacefully. That's the goal.
And that brings us back to a key idea that keeps popping up in our sources, the two-state solution.
Right, the idea of an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. It's been the main framework for peace talks for decades. Many believe it's the only way to truly end the conflict.
But as we've discussed, there's strong opposition to the two-state solution on both sides. Some Israelis see the West Bank as an inseparable part of their historical and biblical homeland. And some Palestinians view the two-state solution as a betrayal of their claim to all of historic Palestine.
You've hit the nail on the head. The two-state solution is far from simple. It would require compromise from both sides, a willingness to let go of deeply held beliefs and narratives about the land.
And is it even realistic at this point? With the continued expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, is a contiguous, viable Palestinian state even possible?
That's a question that sparks a lot of debate. Some argue that the settlements have already made a two-state solution impossible, while others believe it's still achievable if there's enough political will and some creative solutions.
Maybe a long shot, but not entirely out of the question.
Exactly. Regardless of its feasibility, the two-state solution remains a powerful symbol. It represents the hope for a peaceful resolution.
So we've looked at the potential impact of a ceasefire from both the Israeli and Palestinian viewpoints. We've considered the historical background and examined the complexities of the two-state solution. It's a lot to process, and it's clear there are no easy answers. What are your thoughts?
I think you've summed it up well. This conflict is a Gordian knot. It's tangled up in history, ideology, deep-seated fears, and mistrust. But even amidst all that complexity, there's a glimmer of hope. Both sides share a desire for peace, a longing for a better future for their children, and that shared longing is what keeps hope alive.
And maybe, just maybe, a ceasefire, if it's implemented with genuine commitment and concrete steps towards reconciliation, could be the start of that brighter future.
It's a long shot, but not impossible. It all begins with understanding the nuances, recognizing the humanity on both sides, and having those tough but necessary conversations. We have to be willing to listen to each other, empathize with each other's experiences, and challenge our own assumptions.
Right, so we're back. And we've covered a ton of ground. We've looked at the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the potential impact of a ceasefire from both sides, and even grappled with the complexities of the two-state solution. It's a lot to take in. But the big question that keeps coming back to me is this: what does a real path towards peace actually look like? Is it even possible, given all the challenges we've uncovered?
The ultimate question. Right. And yeah, as we've seen, there are no simple answers here. But, our deep dive into these sources has revealed a few glimmers of hope, I think, some potential pathways, even in the face of these seemingly intractable obstacles.
Okay, so let's talk about those pathways. We've mentioned trust-building measures, concrete actions like easing restrictions on movement for Palestinians releasing prisoners and halting settlement expansion. Those seem like pretty tangible steps that could really signal a genuine shift towards peace.
Absolutely. Those are key. Actions like that would demonstrate a commitment to improving Palestinian lives and acknowledging their legitimate concerns. And we can't forget the impact of history, The 1948 Palestinian expulsion and flight, that's still a big issue. Addressing that, even if it's through symbolic gestures or a limited right of return, could be a huge step towards healing those old wounds.
What about the role of the international community? We know they have a part to play, but how can they actually help make this happen?
Well, the international community, those big players like the U.S., they can act as guarantors of any ceasefire agreement, making sure both sides actually stick to the terms. And they can also provide economic aid to support development and reconstruction on the Palestinian side, help create a more stable and prosperous society.
Right. And there's also the power of people-to-people interactions, isn't there? Some of our sources talked about efforts to promote dialogue and exchange between Israelis and Palestinians. Could that be a way to bridge the divide and build some understanding?
Yeah, for sure. Breaking down those stereotypes and really humanizing the other, that's so important. When Israelis and Palestinians meet face to face, share their stories, and connect on a personal level, it becomes a lot harder to see each other as enemies. These small steps can have a ripple effect, They can change public opinion and create a more positive environment for peace.
So we've got these building blocks, tangible actions to improve Palestinian lives, addressing historical injustices, international support and guarantees, and encouraging dialogue between everyday people.
Yeah.
But how do we move beyond those initial steps? How do we tackle those really big, thorny issues like the status of Jerusalem and the question of settlements?
Those are, without a doubt, the toughest parts of the conflict. Yeah. But, our deep dive suggests a possible approach. It starts with acknowledging that both sides have legitimate claims and really deep attachments to the land. Finding a way to share that land, maybe through creative solutions like land swaps or joint sovereignty arrangements, that could be a way forward.
So it sounds like we're talking about a fundamental shift in thinking here, moving away from this zero-sum game where one side wins and the other loses.
Exactly. A lasting peace requires a win-win solution.
Yeah.
One where both Israelis and Palestinians feel like their security, their identity, their aspirations are all respected. And, that's not just a political or territorial question. It's psychological, too. It's about overcoming generations of fear, mistrust, and trauma.
A huge undertaking, for sure. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm struck by the resilience of the human spirit, that yearning for peace that persists even in the darkest of times.
That yearning for peace, that's what keeps hope alive. It's what drives those people who are working tirelessly, often behind the scenes, to build those bridges, foster understanding, and move us closer to a future where Israelis and Palestinians can finally coexist in peace.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored the complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and considered the potential impact of a ceasefire. There are no easy answers, that much is clear. But as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. The future of this conflict, it's not set in stone. It's being shaped right now by the choices that both sides make and by the actions of the international community. And you know what? We all have a role to play in that future.
We do. It starts with staying informed, seeking out different perspectives, and engaging in thoughtful conversations about these important issues. It's about challenging our own assumptions and biases and advocating for solutions that promote peace and justice for everyone.
So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for a better world. That's what these deep dives are all about. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring.